Good afternoon. The June 20, 2017 Board for Lease of Texas Parks and Wildlife meeting will now come to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our last meeting. As I am the only board member that was in attendance in the last meeting, I've had a chance to review said minutes, so I will make a motion and vote to approve said minutes. Next item on the agenda is number 2, which is consideration action on tracks, terms, conditions for August 1, 2017 oil and gas lease sale.
Good afternoon, Commissioner, board members. I'm Robert Hatter with the Energy Resources Division. Staff has received nominations for 3 tracks, 3 40-acre tracks, all within Mustang Island State Park in Nueces County. There are existing wells existing non-producing gas wells on all 3 tracks. And at this time, with the permission of the board, I believe Parks and Wildlife, Bob Sweeney, who's an attorney with Parks and Wildlife, would like to address the board about some concerns that they have.
Thank you, Robert. Commissioner, Land Commissioner, Commissioner. These wells that are nominated on Mustang Island State Park have a long history. The lease recently expired. The existing lease is probably because they have not been very productive. And these have caused a lot of issues for our natural resource staff over the years. There's been a lot of spills, brine, and other contaminants. We've had the Railroad Commission out there a number of times, and they consider these high priority sites for cleanup. So we're talking about surface facilities that are in really, really bad shape. As you know, there are many places where minerals that are under the control of Parks and Wildlife Department have been successfully leased by this board for lease. This situation, if there's ever a case where it would be appropriate to just say this is not an appropriate place to lease minerals, I think really this is it. These are very low producing wells. The environmental impact is very great. There's a lot of surface damage that's gone on. So that would be the recommendation. I'm, by the way, I should introduce myself, Bob Sweeney. I'm the acting general counsel now of the agency. And so that would be the recommendation of Parks and Wildlife staff, is that, that the nomination of these particular tracks not go forward. If there are other choices that the board would like to consider, another possibility is to do no surface use, which is frequently done with Parks and Wildlife tracks that can be reached through directional drilling. That would be a second choice, although that may not be practical in this case. But I'm available for any questions if you'd like to talk about the matter further.
So just to be clear, our staff is recommending, GLO staff is recommending to move forward with the lease. Parks and Wildlife, it has expressed concern through the General Counsel.
Actually, I certainly understand Parks and Wildlife's position. There has been a history of spills, and given the proximity to the Gulf of Mexico and Corpus Christi Bay, or Laguna Madre rather, it is environmentally sensitive. So I don't think the board can go wrong here. GLO staff is throwing this out just as an option, which would be the 25% royalty, 3-year primary term, $100 per acre based on comps in the area that are fairly recent out in the Gulf, and $10 per acre rental with, as Mr. Sweeney said, no surface use at all. But GLO staff's not, we're not recommending against not leasing, and we're just throwing out an option. This is in line with a lot of what we've done in the past with no surface use.
So maybe we talk about a little bit, to provide a little bit more context for the board in terms of the prior lease and other incidents of whether it be oil spill or reclamation issues. Can either one of you speak to that, perhaps? And
I can start. Bob knows a lot. Excuse me, Mr. Sweeney knows a lot more about it than I did. We work together a lot. The 3 wells that are out there now were operated by a company called LeMay Corporation. They have since gone insolvent. It's L-A-M-A-Y. They have since gone insolvent, so they're not going to come out and clean up the mess. I believe, I can't tell you for certain, but that the intent of the nominator would be to try to rehabilitate these wells. It's called it's a small field called the Shell Point Field. I believe it's in the Frio Formation. Obviously, with no surface use, these wells would not be worth, at least in my personal opinion, would not be worth re-drilling directionally, since they have produced for quite some years. First production was in the mid-1980s. Last production on one of the wells was 1990, and last production on the other two was December of 2015. So they have not produced in some time, which led to the termination of the leases.
I mean, were they, can we characterize them more as exploratory in nature? And I mean, where there was an attempt perhaps by the operator to find a prolific resource but never was obtained, or is this an actual productive region?
I don't think that,
geologically speaking?
Here again, I'm just supposing, but I don't believe that they would want to drill deeper wells. There's not an active, I don't see any permitting in the area, so I don't think, there's not another active play going on out there where it would warrant a company going into these wells and deepening them. Like I said, they're quite, they're fairly old, being 1980s wells. Certainly, if there was any, so if you look at it, re-establishing production, or you would be looking at going uphole and perfing another zone potentially. I think if there was value behind pipe, they probably would have done it, but maybe not. But still, is it worth the risk?
Yeah. Assuming you, well, I don't know
if you wanted to speak to
Mr. Sweeney.
any what's happened out there, as far as
environmentally speaking, perhaps.
Sure. Thank you, Bob Sweeney again. This is this area of the state park. We have been successful in extending in some places the park all the way from the Gulf to the Bay side, and with some recent acquisitions. These particular wells are in a very sensitive area environmentally. It would be very damaging for them to go outside or use any part of the surface apart from what's currently being used. They're very visible to people driving up and down the road there, so they're really aesthetically not adding to the experience of going to Mustang Island State Park, nor would additional rework activity be an asset to the park. It certainly wouldn't be an asset from an environmental standpoint. We had problems with LeMay. We tried to get surface use agreements with them. We just didn't have the leverage, and that has been going on for about the last 10 years in terms of spills and other incidents. So it's a long and unhappy history that's taken, frankly, an enormous amount of staff time to manage. Our natural resource specialist down there spends a lot of time calling the Railroad Commission and checking on the condition of these particular wells, and she has a lot of territory to cover. So this has been a real sink for our resources, and we would be very happy if we didn't have to continue to put resources into it. Thank you.
Assuming you can't identify the new producer, I mean, have they shared with staff perhaps a projection in terms of what they could generate? Because the way that I'm looking at it is that we've signed historically 3 leases. All 3 have fallen out. We get a 25% royalty at $100 an acre with a minimum bid. I mean, it helps to weigh the environmental balance with how much money we can make for our beneficiaries in this proposed lease.
Yes, sir. The nominator has not offered up any idea of what these would generate. I guess you could suppose, based on recent production, the wells, one of them cumed 22,000 barrels of oil and 1.6 BCF. It's something, but not, it's not substantial. Another one was kind of similar, 10,000 barrels of oil, and this is over a period of at least 10 years, and 1.3 BCF of gas. There again, not a lot of either oil or gas.
So to ballpark, we could say 2,000, let's say 2,000 barrels of oil on an annual basis. And
last rate of the 2 wells that were producing in 2015, last productive rates.
I was just quoting that first ledger.
0 oil. Let me see. Yeah, they stopped producing oil and they were making about an MCF a day each. So it's not a substantial amount of money. I would suppose that if you put a decline curve to these, they're probably right down at their economic limit. So unless there's a behind pipe, uphole target, that you'd be looking for something like that.
And do we know how deep those
I do
are?
not have actual depths on them.
So we don't even know if there's behind pipe
No.
value?
We wouldn't have any idea, since we didn't operate them. There is some production out in the Gulf. Those leases are very old. They're probably from the 60s. That's all Frio production and probably some Miocene production. Looks like there's some newer leases in the Gulf a ways away, but there's no production there currently, and we don't know, likely be going after Frio or Vicksburg. Would be deeper wells. So they would have to deepen these wells in order to reach those formations.
If I may make one more point. Thank you, Robert. When you see sort of marginal production like this, the concern becomes, additional concern on our part is the incentive of the operator to remediate, or the means even to remediate messes that occur. And that's a challenge that we would have going forward is there enough of an incentive for the operator to do the things that they might in good faith intend to do, but if the production is simply not there and the wells aren't making sense for them, then you can see the strong incentive to perhaps not fully address the problems that might exist on the site, or simply not have the means to do it. So that's always a concern with older wells that are sort of multi-generation operators, and these are probably very far down on that side of the spectrum of being marginal.
Question with the three existing wells. Those were drilled and operated with no surface use agreements in place? Is that correct?
I believe that's right. I believe these were originally leased in the 1970s. Is that right, Robert?
We need to get 2 mics.
I'm not fighting.
I'm not complaining. Yeah, the wells were drilled in the mid-'80s, so those leases would have had to have been, at most, at least in the late 70s, because there was probably 10-year primary terms. You can see to the west, you have the Flower Bluff field over near Flower Bluff across Laguna Madre. Those wells were drilled decades ago, and those are shallow Miocene wells, I believe. And so there's really no recent activity. You don't see, if there was a recently permitted well, it would be colored red on this map, but you don't see anything in the general area. So
I'm just curious about, you're talking about marginal wells at best, and the economics of going in and trying to rework these and access it with no surface use. I mean, how would you even go about?
the only way to do it would be to do, and I'm not sure about the depth of the wells. Obviously, if a well is or a formation is too shallow, it's very difficult to drill directionally to it because you have to build the curve to get to it. But that would require that they be out in Laguna Madre or out in the Gulf of Mexico, which means you'd have to be, Laguna Madre you could set up fairly close, depending on water depth. It would require probably a dredging permit from the Corps of Engineers. In the Gulf, you'd have to be farther out because you don't want to drill a well in the surf zone, too close to the island. So that would make it impractical to drill from the Gulf side. Laguna side, it would be expensive. Operating in a marine environment is much more expensive than being on land. So while I don't know for certain, I would think, given the productive history of these wells at just a few BCF, it would not warrant the drilling of additional wells, particularly from Laguna Madre, which is a fairly shallow water environment.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board?
What % mineral ownership does the state have?
I believe on these, the Parks and Wildlife, I believe, owns 100% of the minerals. There is an outstanding royalty interest of record. So refusing, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice, but there is the interest. There is the interest of a. That's not my place, but there is an outstanding interest. I guess they could argue that, by not leasing it, you're somehow, basically cutting off their rights to the royalty. But that would be illegal. That'd be something Bob would address.
Well, I'd like to share some thoughts, and throughout the idea, I don't want to speak on behalf of the board unless the board has other questions, comments, but I'm inclined to perhaps table this lease for right now at minimum, and look at alternatives, but just based upon testimony that GC from Parks and Wildlife is providing, along with the historic context of the performance of the wells, I'm struggling to assess the positive side of signing and inking a deal today. I think we'd be remiss to not, look deeper at it, ask more from the operator in terms of their projections for what they can actually do. Perhaps we look at ways in which the leases has multiple hooks from an environmental standpoint, something that we've looked at the GLO, from everything from coastal activity to onshore disposal issues. But even then, I just think that in light of the burdens that you've testified to on your staff, vis-a-vis how much money we can actually generate for the agency, it doesn't pencil out for me. Other board members may have viewpoints on that, but that's just my perspective on it, for what it's worth.
I agree.
So in light of that, we'll make sure to follow up on proposal or alternatives, and appreciate staff coming forward with the idea on the proposal for the lease. And if that requires us to have a meeting and or a motion, or to move in lieu of a board meeting, we can do that in the interim. Nothing prevents us from doing that. But I think the board has moved to table the proposal at the time, and there being no further business before the board, I believe we can hereby adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.